Today we're visiting with Robert Weaver in his Glendale landscape. We'll be looking at his sunny petite prairie. We'll be looking at his neat little woodland garden in the backyard. And also talking a little bit about some design principles and practices that he's used with native plants. Good morning, Robert. We're really thankful for you to invite us here to your landscape. We're really looking forward to spending some time and looking at some of the highlights in your yard.
Glad to have you here.
And we really just can't get over this front walk of yours, so we thought what better place to start than discussing and looking at these really neat plants you've got lining your front walk.
All right. Well, this is a recent addition. We had this walk installed a few years ago. We have a family member who's in a wheelchair, and we struggled to get him in and out of the house, which had a couple steps going in. And as we got older, we decided to quit fighting that fight. So putting in this walk also gave us an opportunity to add some plants, and wanted to go all native. So that's what we've done here. We have a few different cultivars here. This is Carex radiata, which is a star sedge, and it's a nice fine looking sort of grass like sedge. I've recently pruned this back. It does tend to flop a little bit after its early flush in the spring, so I gave it a quick haircut a couple of weeks ago, and it just kind of tidies it up and it'll grow back out again.
In this walk, Robert, I mean, it seems awfully sunny. Is it full sun? Is it just morning sun?
It's about half full sun now. It used to be pretty shady, which is why I selected these particular plants for more shade. But we lost the silver maple over in that area over there, and this side probably is sun most of the day. This side gets about half a day's sun, or even a little bit less, because we still have some tall oak trees over here that provide afternoon sun. So yeah, the intent was for more of a shade garden, and as circumstances sometimes happen, we lost some of that shade. But
Got it. Okay.
so this is Rigeron pulchella here. It's spring daisy, or robin's plantain is another name for it. It forms kind of a densely matted ground cover, as you can see. In the spring, around March and April, it gets these very pretty spring daisies, white daisies with yellow buttons in the middle. It's nice and attractive in the spring, and then forms this dense cover. It does not compete very well with violets, so I do have to go through here and dredge out the violets every once in a while, but it's not a hard job. And we have more Carex here. And then this is a native heuchera, alum root. This one is called little flower alum root. It's Heuchera parviflora. And once again, it's really more at home in the shade, which we've got it in the sun right now, but it'll be in the shade by afternoon. Over on the other side, it gets more sun, so it does tend to get a little crispy, and sometimes I have to go through and clean out the dead leaves. But it seems to do pretty well here.
So I think this is a good opportunity for me to ask you a little bit just about garden design. So if I'm not mistaken, this entire space is just 3 different plant species.
Right.
And
the native hydrangeas that I put up there against the wall, so they were planted at the same time. But yeah, I really wanted it to be kind of simple, and sort of it's in the front yard, so it makes it a little more formal rather than rather than having you know, a lot of different species. I just thought it had a little more formal look for this type of an arrangement.
But we see you've repeated them, and also you have them in mass plantings.
Right. And I'm not a designer by any means, so maybe this is totally a false theory, but I didn't want to repeat them symmetrically. I kind of wanted to alternate them just to give it a little different look, and that's what I did. Whether that's a good design practice or not, I'll leave up to the designer.
Well, we happen to like it. We happen to like it. We think it's very pretty. But also,
yeah,
I just
intent
wanted
for just using a few species was just to keep it simple and a little more formal looking for the front yard application.
Yeah, and also just to emphasize, I mean, this is native plants,
Right.
and yet this is gardening, and this is a rather formal and traditional look.
Yeah.
So again, there's nothing common stereotype of native plants. People think that they're wild flowers, but we try to emphasize, and this I think is a great example of how the native plants look in your yard is driven by how you want to garden with them.
How you use them, and of course selecting the right plants too. There are some plants that just don't want to be tamed, but these do a pretty good job. I've never seen any of these heucheras show up anywhere else. The Carex will tend to wander a little bit into the adjacent plantings, but like you said, that's gardening. You know, you weed them out and keep them in the space.
Robert, speaking of garden design, which we talked briefly about there on the front walk earlier, we're now here in your prairie garden, your pollinator garden. Let's continue that. Let's talk a little bit more about garden design, but what you've done in this space.
Okay. Well, in the front space, as we mentioned, the planting design was a little bit more formal because it was a front yard space. Here I wanted to have more of a prairie garden. I called it my petite prairie. I don't know if all the plants in here are specific to prairie, but they are all straight species, native species. But it's a little more informal, a lot more informal design. It's more casual, I guess. But there are things that I've tried to do because it does border up against my neighbor's yard. So there are some elements I've tried to include that make it a little more of an intended space, so it's not just a weed patch. One of those things is the path that invites people to walk around, but it also defines the space and just makes it look like you know, it's an intended space.
So I see this is a lot of pine straw.
Right.
Is this yours? You have some pine trees here.
Oh, we have a few. I used to have a lot of pine trees and got almost all of my supply from my own pine trees, but over the years I've lost quite a few of them, so I've had to resort to a couple of methods to get the pine needles. One, I go around the neighborhood and offer to rake up other people's pine trees. I was out on Lockwood, which is a big boulevard here near our house, raking up pine trees off the adjacent street to the golf course. And on occasion I buy pine straw bales. I don't know if I can put in a plug, but it's really the only place I know of to buy pine straw bales in the St. Louis area, and that's Zick's Great Outdoors out in Wildwood area. So I have purchased bales of pine straw from them.
I see you also have borders.
I have borders. It's another thing I scrounge from the neighbors. Whenever a tree comes down, I try and take as many branches as I can from them. There's another border which you can't see behind this, underneath this fragrant sumac. I have a zigzag cedar fence that goes kind of right through the center of this, but over the years the fragrant sumac has consumed it. But that's another strategy that you can use to establish some sort of intent in your garden. And then also I have a statue over here, some kind of a garden art. Another thing in there that's been buried, but it's just another way to help tell your neighbors that you're not just letting the weeds grow, that this is an intended spot.
So what's this, Robert?
This is in the Silphium family. It's a Prairie Dock. Can't remember the species name, but it's in the same family as cup plant and compass plant. So typical of those family members, it has big leaves down at the base and then will shoot up a tall flower stalk with a yellow daisy-like flower on it. I like this one in particular because it doesn't seem to seed as aggressively as some of the others like cup plant does in the garden. It will pop up here and there, but it seems to be a little better behaved. And also I just like the structure of the leaves and the contrast to these broad big leaves against most of the other plants in the prairie garden, which are more feathery leaved. So it just kind of gives a little different look to the garden.
So this flower stalk then is going to produce ultimately essentially small sunflowers.
Right. And it's what, about 4 feet tall now. It'll probably double that before it actually flowers. Although it's got a little bud on it now.
So you referenced plants next door here. This looks like what, New England Aster?
This is New England Aster mostly. There might be some Canadian goldenrod in there, which I haven't weeded out yet. They look similar. But yeah, this is, if you don't want New England Aster to get this tall, sometime about in April or May, you can cut it back by half. Is that about the right timing in your mind?
I've heard Memorial Day and 4th of July being sort of key milestones for cutting back.
4th of July would probably be about a cutoff point. You might risk cutting off the flower buds if you wait any later than that. But yeah, but you can do that, and it will still flower. It might flower a week or two later than any that you don't prune back, but they'll still come out and flower just fine.
But this is a very good example, though, of just how tall some of these plants do want to be.
Right.
New England Aster is not a short plant.
No, it's okay in this situation. May not be okay in others, but that doesn't mean you can't use it in other situations. It just requires a little more gardening.
Speaking of tall plants, we see some Liatris, some blazing star behind you.
Yes. I'm not really sure which species this is. I have several species of blazing star in here, and I'd have to get my notes out to see which is which.
Now this is one that we're actually a little surprised to see this one this tall. So again, it's your height, and it's still upright. It's not flopped over.
It is, yeah. It had a couple of stems that did flop over, and I pruned those off earlier. We just had a rain last night, so there's a lot of things that are flopping in the garden right now that weren't flopping yesterday. But yeah, so far it's pretty sturdy.
So we see you have a buttonbush in your prairie garden.
Yes, it's done well here. It's more at home in a wetland area or a moist area, but this is quite a dry area, and yet it does just fine. Its tendency is to grow big and bushy and full. We spoke earlier about strategies to give your garden an intended look, and I conducted an experiment on my buttonbush this last winter. I tried to prune it up in more of a form kind of structure. So I had just moderate success with that. So you can probably see a lot of suckers coming up. I'm kind of letting them go because I might choose some different leaders to allow in the future and cut back some of these other branches that are sprawling out.
But this is not a small plant.
No, it's well, I'm 6 feet tall, so we got 7 or 8 feet there. And once again, before I took the pruners to it last winter, it was full and bushy, 10 feet in any direction.
And yet that would seem to indicate if one really wanted a buttonbush but didn't want an 8 or 10 foot tall or wide plant, you could just aggressively prune it occasionally?
You can, yeah. You can already see that it's sending out a lot of suckers, so you could just let those suckers go and cut back these main branches. I was looking for a little more structure, so if I liked the structure that I had, I'd probably go ahead and prune those suckers off, but I'm kind of going to reapproach it this winter and see if I can give it a better shape.
How old is this plant, Robert?
I think I installed this with the initial prairie planting, which was 2006. Well, this is my little bubbler, and Margie and Dan were very instrumental. In fact, it was their design, and they helped me install it. As Margie says, nothing will attract birds to a garden more than moving water, and so I wanted to add a little feature, but didn't have much room. So this worked out just fine for me. It's very simple to make. We installed this in just a couple of hours one morning, and it just involves a 5-gallon bucket buried in the ground, a pond liner, and that's about it, really. You have to run some electricity to it, unless you get a solar panel or a solar-powered pump. And it does a very good job of attracting birds. My office is right over there, so I can look out here and watch the birds as they bathe or get a drink. They love to come here and alight on this stick or in these bushes, and it brings them in.
And this looks just like maybe, what, 4 or 5 feet square? Pretty small spot?
Right, yeah. It's pretty small. It's pretty easy to maintain. You can use certain chemicals to keep the water clean, but I just tilt this rock forward and it causes the water to fall out that way, and I drain the water out every couple of weeks. As I was just telling Mitch earlier, I can usually tell when the water needs to be refreshed because the birds will stop coming to it. They'll take a look at it and they know when it's not clean and they'll stay away. So within just a matter of hours after refreshing it, they seem to keep an eye on me, and they'll be back bathing again.
And do you keep this running through the winter?
I do. I don't have it in there now, but I have a trough heater that you just bury in there and keep it plugged in, and it keeps the water running. I have pictures of the water running and birds bathing with snow all around, and sometimes it's even more popular in the wintertime because there are fewer sources of water for the birds.
Very good. So we see it's not all about sun here at the Weaver Estate. You got a little shade garden here.
I do. And it took me a lot of years to realize that native plants also grow in the shade. I always, my introduction to native plants was through prairie, and so I just, for years and years, thought I could only plant them in the sun. But this at one time was a bed of English ivy and winter creeper for years. And I finally, a few years ago, decided to expunge the ivy and put in a woodland native garden here. So that's what's represented here. Got woodland spiderwort blooming right now, Tradescantia. Got some woodland phlox over there in bloom, garden phlox. lot of people think of phlox and coneflower as being totally sun plants, but coneflower will actually do quite well in a woodland garden.
Looks like some ferns.
These are sensitive ferns.
I see ginger.
There's some wild ginger in there.
Some geranium.
And some wild geranium. In the springtime, there's a lot of trillium in this garden, and Jacob's ladder, some bloodroot, wild geranium.
What's this one?
That is horse mint. Some also call it pagoda flower or something. I'm not sure why over here it seems to get quite chlorotic, but still flowers, still attracts the bees. And this is an annual. A lot of people don't think about annuals in a native garden, but this is called jewelweed. It's in the Impatiens family. A lot of people are familiar with the garden annual Impatiens that you plant in shady areas. This is in the same family. This can be very seedy, so you have to kind of, if you want to keep it in a certain area, you'll have to do some weeding in the spring, but it pulls up very easily, so it's not a problem to weed out. I could probably find one. And it comes out quite easily. But the hummingbirds love this, the flower on this. So if you like to attract hummingbirds to your garden, consider jewelweed.
So what woody plants, what shrubs, what have you installed?
I've got sassafras here, another sassafras back there. I have a spicebush here. This was a volunteer redbud tree that's a native that does well here. And this used to be a dogwood tree, but it didn't like being transplanted here at a ripe age, so we'll have to replace that. Back there we've got pawpaw, which is very distinctive for its big leaves, and we'll get the pawpaw fruit. Maybe you can answer this. I don't know if I have to have two to get the fruit or not. So yeah, I have to get two, so I probably won't get the fruit on this. I'll need to plant another one.
And yet, even without the fruit, you do have the opportunity to support the, was it the zebra swallowtail,
Right.
I think?
Yeah, zebra swallowtail.
So the pawpaw being a host plant for them.
Right.
And what's this next to the pawpaw?
That is the native 9-bark. It's pretty, if you like spirea type flower or bush, it resembles very much the spirea in the springtime.
So this is a pretty small garden, but you've packed a lot into it.
Yeah, it's got a lot of interest to it. It's definitely much more interesting now than it was when it was English ivy and winter creeper. And it's a lot easier to maintain. Every year I used to have to rake out all the leaves of the ivy, and now I rake the leaves into the garden to provide the compost.
Robert, really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Enjoyed our visit with you and walking around in your landscape here. Any parting thoughts or best practices or tips you wanted to leave with our folks?
Well, I just want to thank you for coming over and allowing me to show my garden to you. I've been gardening seriously, I guess, for about 20 years or so, and it's been an evolution from mostly exotic plants that, of course, we all get introduced because that's what all of our neighbors grow, into more native plants now. I still have a mixture of both, and there are still a lot of exotic plants that I enjoy and don't plan on getting rid of, but it's very easy to introduce and intersperse native plants when you have the opportunity, as I did when I had my front walk installed. So I encourage everybody to take advantage of those opportunities when they have them, and to learn more about native plants. In our magazine, The Gateway Gardener, we have an article in every issue by Scott Woodbury, who's the curator of the Shaw Nature Reserve, and I encourage people to pick up a copy of the magazine or read it online and learn more about native plants from there, and go out and visit Shaw Nature Reserve, and maybe you'll meet Scott Woodbury out there.
Well, Robert, thanks again. We do appreciate it, and stay cool in this St. Louis hot summer.
You too, Mitch. Thanks.